Hey, Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Thanks so much for being here. Welfare corrupts our morals. Talking about this because we have a $3.5 trillion budget that's about to be passed, largest budget ever. And I kind of feel like no one's talking about it. Like no one even cares about the budget anymore. We're so far past any rational consideration when it comes to the budget. It's just like, whatever, 3, 8, 29 trillion. I don't know. Like, who even cares about numbers anymore? As David Harsanyi noted on the show yesterday, when Obamacare was like 10 years ago, they struggled and did some funny math to try to get it under $1 trillion. They needed it to be under $1 trillion because $1 trillion was like too bonkers of a number, and people would definitely be against it if it was over $1 trillion. That was $1 trillion over 10 years. This budget is 1 year, and it's $3.5 trillion. And I think people don't even think about it because the number 3 is a low number. Right? So people are like, oh, the budget's 3. Oh, that's not that bad. Trillion. And by that point, they're not even considering anymore. It's like they don't even hear the trillion part. They're just like, oh, 3, that's not a lot. Unbelievable. Now, one of the worst parts of this budget, there's plenty, is it is the largest increase in the welfare state ever. And again, that's something else that we just like stop talking about. Like, when's the last time you heard someone speak against the growing welfare state? And as we don't talk about it anymore, the moral fiber of our country continues to erode because of it. Got a story I want to share for you. John B. Calhoun, not to be confused with John C. Calhoun, who's a slave owner who's been canceled from all of society. This is John B. Calhoun. 1960s. He worked at the National Institute for Mental Health. And here was his experiment. You ready? He put up a pen, 9 by 4.5 feet metal pen, and he put 4 pairs of mice in the pen. And he gave them everything. He gave them water dispensers, plenty of food, tunnels, and nesting shelters. Gave them everything that they needed in the hierarchy of needs, right? The mice could have all the food they could imagine, and there was no predators that would get them. There's no risk to their life whatsoever. He made them a little mouse utopia. Now, the original purpose of the study was to look at population density and study that, right? But he learned a lot more. One of his lines in his analysis was, "I shall largely speak of mice, but my thoughts are on man." Okay, so here's what happened. The number of mice doubled every 55 days, as mice are wont to do. But after 600 days, the population of the mice peaked at 2,200. Again, started with 8. Peaked at 2,200. And there was plenty of room for more. There's room for another 1,600. But then the population declined. To what? Let me ask you that. Population declined. So it was at 8, went up to 2,200, and then declined. How low did it decline? If it got up to 2,200, like maybe it declined to 1,500 and then kind of plateaued at 1,500? What do you think? Started at 8, went to 2,200, peaked, declined, all the way down to 0. 0. They all died? What do you mean they all died? All of their needs were met. Plenty of food, plenty of water, no predators. Not like a bunch of hawks from the neighboring experiment came in and ate them all. Like, all the mice died. Things started to take a turn for the worst on day 315. This is when all the mice started to go crazy. So what do I mean by that? The females abandoned their young. So again, as I'm reading this, like I'm speaking of mice, but just like John B. Calhoun, I'm speaking of mice, think of humans, right? The females abandoned their young. The male mice no longer defended their territory. Both sexes became more violent. They all became more sexually and socially deviant. The last 1,000 mice to be born avoided all stressful activity and focused only on themselves. Sounds familiar. This is a friend of Calhoun, fellow scientist as well, who wrote about this experiment. He said other young mice growing into adulthood exhibited an even different type of behavior. And Calhoun called them the beautiful ones. Their time was devoted solely to grooming, eating, and sleeping. They never involved themselves with others, engaged in sex, nor would they fight. All appeared as a beautiful exhibit of the species, with keen, alert eyes and a healthy, well-kept body. But these mice, however, could not cope with unusual stimuli. Though they looked inquisitive, they were in fact very stupid. Do I need to read that again so that we can think about it and apply it to our current state of our American culture? First of all, they were called the beautiful ones, and they were dedicated to what? Grooming themselves. What is Gen Z or whatever it is, if not just living entirely on social media? How about this toy I came across the other day? This is a toy for little kids where they can pretend to be vloggers. Right? It's like a fake camera with a ring light and everything. Like, how sad is that? But that's what we do. We're dedicated to grooming ourselves and presenting ourselves to the camera and eating and sleeping. The beautiful ones. They never involved themselves with others. Well, look at what COVID, I mean, we were already in a problem with that, but look at what COVID's done for that. COVID has scared away any little, even ounce of social interaction that ever even did occur in person with young people in particular. These mice were not engaging in sex. There's been a bunch of surveys over the last few years, even before COVID, that teenagers are having less sex than ever before. But it's not because there's been like a biblical moral revolution and people understand that premarital sex is a sin. Like, that's not what it is. It's because there's too much porn. There's so much porn. So why have sex? And then everyone's so awkward because there's no social interaction. So boys can't even talk to girls. And then there's fewer just social places to gather. Everything's done online. But that's what happened with the mice as well. They said the mice won't even fight. I think that's true today too. I think there's just this like malaise. There's just this dead in the eyes malaise. The mice, they appeared keen and well kept. And I think a lot of people do that with millennials. I hear a lot of analysis of not millennials. Well, I guess millennials and younger. And it'll be very like, oh, well, millennials, I'm a millennial, by the way. They have a lot of good things going for them too. They're very smart. They're very nice. It's like, no, I don't think they have a lot of good things going for them. They appear well kept, but they can't cope with unusual stimuli. And this is true for kids and it's true for adults as well. This is a great line from Carol Markowitz in the New York Post. She was talking about masking kids and everything. And one of the lines is, but they're resilient, say the least resilient adults ever. So almost no one today can cope with unusual stimuli. These mice and people today, they look inquisitive, but in fact are very stupid. Now, hold on, let's go back to the mice here. So this doesn't make any sense, Slater. These mice had everything. They had all of their needs met. Why do they all die? You'd think they'd love it. You'd think they'd thrive. They have all their food, all the water, all the play, no threats, place to stay, plenty of room. So why did they decline? I don't get it. Like, wouldn't they plateau or something? Like, why would you decline? They all died. Here's what Calhoun's friend said. He said, utopia, when one has everything at any moment for no expenditure, prompts declines in responsibility, effectiveness, and awareness of social dependence, and finally leads to self-extinction. We can prosper ourselves to death. Wow, weird. We can prosper ourselves to misery. We can prosper ourselves to extinction. His conclusion was that this is Dr. Calhoun's conclusion was that the mice died from a lack of a healthy challenge. Whoa. Yesterday on the show, we talked about kids and fear. Remember we quoted Robert Frost's Birches and skateboarding and courage and grit, all that, right? And we talked about how COVID has just pummeled this idea of building courage and grit in our kids. Now we're raising our kids to think that they're wispy, tiny, little fragile porcelain dolls where a little gust of wind can just shatter them into pieces. We're teaching our kids, we're truly raising our kids to be scared to breathe air. Kids are terrified of air. And actually, when I say like error, E-R-R-O-R, like they're afraid of making any mistakes because the world will collapse, right? So they're afraid of making error, making mistakes. They're not resilient. And they're afraid of air, like breathing in oxygen. And remember the kid, we played the video, that little 2-year-old kid in daycare, and they're forcing this mask on the poor kid. He's ripping it off and screaming. And one of the women says, Mason, it'll keep you safe. It'll keep you safe. So why did these mice die? Oddly, they were too safe. The theory is they had a lack of a healthy challenge. And Calhoun said this is the paradox of a life without work or conflict. When all the sense of necessity is stripped from the life of an individual, life ceases to have purpose, and the individual, check this out, the individual dies in spirit. Because you're thinking, Slater, we're not going extinct. Humans are not going extinct, although, look at birth rates, kind of. Sure, but are we alive in spirit? Our kids are alive. I mean, suicide rates more than ever, but for the most part, kids are alive, but we're killing their spirit. I know I've mentioned this before, this idea of dead in the eyes, right? I see so many kids, little kids, like teenager kids, they're just like, they're not here. They're just like, sometimes they're darty, their eyes are darting all over the place and they can't focus on them, they're squirming all over the place, dead. But sometimes they're just like, I just see kids like this all the time. Everywhere I go, I see kids just like, they're just dead. They're not present. And then that's for years that's been the case, dead in the eyes. And then these last 2 years, we've taken away everything that's valuable for them. We've taken away their education. We've taken away their friends. We've taken away sports. What does that, when we take away their sports, what are we taking away? We're taking away their sense of pride and accomplishment and achievement and the skills that are built when you overcome failure, right? And the resilience and the grit, right? Take away courage and grit. So we take all this away, and then we tell them to be scared of COVID on top of that. And yeah, they're alive, but they're dead in spirit. You can be so prosperous, as these mice were, that they weren't even interested in perpetuating the species, right? It's like, well, I guess it's like all about me, right? We talk about that all the time too. Everyone worships at the church of me, myself, and I. I'm the center of the universe. I'm everything. I'm all that matters. Look at me. Why is no one looking at me? Oh, no one's looking at me. I'm angry at everyone. I'm bitter now because the world should be revolving around me, but it's not. So I hate everything. Down with the patriarchy. That's how the thought process goes. We've turned into ourselves so much that we've overindulged and died. That's what happened to the mice. I don't know if we're much better. And it's a warning thousands of years old. I mean, there's biblical warnings of the same thing. The Bible tells you to work. You got to work. It's important to work. It's important for your soul to work. There's thousands of years of wisdom here that we're, of course, throwing out the window. And it's only getting worse with this, again, just to bring it back around, the largest increase in the welfare state ever in this latest bill. These COVID relief bills, right? More welfare than ever. People aren't working. Every business I see has a help wanted sign in it. Okay, so the businesses are struggling, but also the people who are at home collecting money think they're doing great. They're struggling as well. Are they alive? Yeah, but they're dead inside or dying inside and eroding inside. Here's FDR, all right? 1935 State of the Union address. FDR, he didn't follow this as much, although there were, at least what his welfare programs were, work programs, right? There's a concept of work. Now we're just guaranteed minimum income. Now we're just handing money out to people, right? So that's how much we've gone. But at least FDR had a concept of you need to work for welfare. But here's what he said. He said 1935, a large proportion of these unemployed and their dependents have been forced on the relief rolls. The burden of the federal government has grown with great rapidity. We have here, check it out, a human as well as an economic problem. So many people only focus on the economic problems with welfare. I like to focus on the human problems. Here he is. The lessons of history show conclusively that continued dependence upon relief induces a spiritual and moral disintegration, fundamentally destructive to the national fiber. To dole out relief in this way is to administer a narcotic, a subtle destroyer of the human spirit. This is unbelievable. Could you imagine if Trump said this? FDR, because these stupid polls that come out every once in a while by historians, like who's the greatest president. FDR is always number one, right? Like if they heard this speech, if Trump said this, holy cow, he'd be destroyed. Work must be found for able-bodied workers. The federal government must and shall quit the business of relief. It's just giving money to people. I am not willing that the vitality of our people be further sapped by the giving of cash. We must preserve not only the bodies of the unemployed from destitution, but also their self-respect, their self-reliance, and courage and determination. Amazing. The mice were so prosperous, they all died. They had everything given to them to the point where they turned completely in on themselves and died. All of them. One of the biggest differences, plenty of differences, but one of the biggest differences between mice and humans is we're even worse. Mice don't tax each other, right? They don't have taxes. And also mice don't sin, so there's no envy. So on top of this mouse experiment, which has its limitations, of course, on top of that, you have anger and resentment and envy and greed and bitterness. And then we have a government that comes in and taxes. And then you have more wealth, envy, and more bitterness and more anger. And it goes on, and it piles on top of each other even more every day. Then the government, right? They have the power to tax. Well, they also have the power to give. And if they have the power to give, then they have the power to take away. So they're taking money from people who they're taxing, they're giving it to other people, and when they give something to that person, they can also take away other things from those people, and those people are now dependent on the government. So whenever they take away anything, rights, freedoms, whatever it is, it's fine, because now I'm dependent on you. The government today, we're at the point where the government feels like they have ownership over your body. And I'm not talking about abortion, because abortion is not about your body, it's about the body inside of your body, it's about the body of that human child inside of you. I'm talking about you with your medical decisions about your body. That's what they own now. That's what they feel they own. And if you don't comply, then they'll take away all these other privileges that you've been given. I mean, we're right now in this world about vaxxed versus unvaxxed. Even before all this COVID stuff and during, there was this essential versus unessential workers. Remember this talk? Like you gotta watch that talk. Essential workers versus unessential workers. And this budget, the largest increase in the welfare state ever. And it's going to be the new benchmark for the future. If Ron DeSantis ever becomes president and he wants to cut this welfare by $1, then, can you look, he's been just destroying people's lives. Is he? Or is he saving lives? How many of the problems in our country are not only not solved by the welfare state, but caused by the welfare state? But, what's a few trillion more, right? Hey, I want to tell you about our app. Friendly reminder here. So first of all, you got it on your phone. Totally free to download on your smartphone. Also, you have it on your TV. Any smart device. I'm super grateful wherever you're watching us, but you can just go directly, skip the middleman. You go directly to our app, download it for free. It's the easiest, smoothest app experience I've ever seen. You just scroll down, you got all Buck shows, Jesse shows, Dana shows. If you want to listen to this show more, and all of our open mics and everything, all of our special documentaries, everything is right there on the app, and it's totally, completely free in the App Store. Just search for The First. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. So you decide, is Fauci merely wrong, or is he telling a lie? Here he is.
We're almost overrun. I mean, we have a lot of children in hospitals now. So even though relatively speaking, compared to an adult, they do not get as seriously ill, we have lost more children from SARS-CoV-2 than we ever lose for influenza.
That's not true. That's not true at all. Listen to this quote, we've lost more children from COVID than we ever lose from the flu, influenza. We've lost more kids from COVID than we ever lose from the flu. No. Now listen, you may not think this matters. Oh, so you're nitpicking or whatever. But when Lord Fauci, like the top guy who we're supposed to be following and worshiping or whatever, gets something this wrong, I mean, what do you want me to do? Just like let it slide? Like, whatever. Like, no, you have to call that out. This is a major credibility issue. Okay, so here's the deal. CDC numbers. I'm only using CDC numbers. 439 pediatric deaths from COVID. Excuse me, with COVID. Ages 0 to 17, 439 deaths with COVID. Over the last 20 months. You see that little line right there? Over the last 20 months, from the beginning of the pandemic. Now, let's talk about this number 439. How many of those kids were already sick, one way or the other? How many of those kids were healthy? Almost none were healthy. But let me tell you this. Multiple studies. We have multiple studies now that talk about the dying with COVID as opposed to from COVID. UC San Francisco did a study of kids in hospitals in California. And they said there's no reason to believe it's any different across the country. And they say that the hospitalization and death rate from kids from COVID is overcounted by 40%. A study from Stanford showed that in one hospital, their hospital, 39% of pediatric COVID patients had no symptoms at all. But they're labeled as COVID patients. But they don't even have symptoms. They don't even know they have COVID. They have no symptoms. And then another 30% had mild or moderate symptoms that they weren't there for COVID. That's 69% of people in this one hospital that are labeled as pediatric COVID patients either don't even know they have it or like whatever, it's like mild. Like that's not why they're there. Now, just in case you think I'm making this up, here's the headline. This is from the Stanford Med School website. It says COVID-19 hospitalizations among children likely overcounted. Researchers find not likely is. Another study of VA hospitals. This is with adults, but same thing with kids. No reason to think it's any different. They looked at 50,000 patients at VA hospitals across the country and labeled as COVID. 48% of them were asymptomatic or mild or moderate. Right? So they weren't there because of COVID. They were there with COVID, which inflates the number of hospitalizations, obviously, and surely inflates the numbers of deaths as well. So that 439 number, we'll go with it. We'll work with it. We'll use it. But know that that is with COVID, not necessarily dead from COVID. That is a very, very inflated number. Okay, so you got two asterisks on that number. 439 kids dead from COVID, or with COVID. That's with COVID and over 20 months, almost 2 years. Now, kids and the flu, well, it's the opposite. If we counted every kid who died for any reason whatsoever, but if they happen to have the flu at the moment, then the numbers would be out of control. But the CDC doesn't count the flu that way, nor should they, right? So when the CDC counts deaths from the flu, it is just from the flu. Now, the 2012 flu season, there were 1,161 deaths from the flu. These were specifically flu deaths. And that's over 12 months. It's a flu season, right? It's 1 year, not 20 months. That number is more. 1,161 is more than 430 or whatever it was, right? Now, that's a bad flu year. You see here, these are all the different flu seasons and the number of kids 0 to 18 who have died. All right, it ranges, right? I mean, what do you see when you look at that? I see, 130, that's a low one. I see 200, 300. But then you see a couple 400, 600s. There's an 800. There's that bad one, 1,000 one, right? So it's kind of ranges. The swine flu of 2009, before that one, killed 1,153 kids. 1,153, way more than COVID. And I never heard a peep about the swine flu in kids, let alone not letting kids eat lunch together or forcing them to wear masks outside on the playground. Did you ever hear anything about the swine flu in kids? And there are no precautions. So here's the short of it. COVID deaths from kids are overcounted. Flu deaths are, if anything, undercounted. And still then, even then, Fauci said we have lost more children from COVID than we ever lose from influenza. Ever. Now, I put this on Twitter yesterday, and people are like, oh, Slater, you idiot. In whatever, can you guys throw it back up there? They would do the year with like the lowest. What was the year with 130? They'd be like, oh, well, in 2014, Yeah, in 2013, 14, only 130 kids died. It's like, okay, you picked the lowest number of deaths in a year. But that's not what Fauci said. He said, we've lost more children from COVID than we ever lose from the flu. Well, you can look at pretty much any other flu year. If you average out the pediatric deaths from the flu over the last 10 years, if you average those out, the number of kids who died with COVID is still 46% lower than the average. It's about half the average. That's off by a lot. Like, that's a big misstatement or lie. I'm inclined to think lie. Well, we know from Fauci, he's admitted that a couple different times he's said things in order to inspire people to get them to act a little differently, like herd immunity. He's like, oh yeah, herd immunity is 60%, and he said that because he heard about 50% of people are going to get vaccinated. So if you just keep it kind of close, then maybe I'll inspire more people to get vaccinated, right? And then when 60% of people were vaccinated, I said, well, it's going to take 70% of people to get vaccinated to get herd immunity. And so he admitted that he lied about that, just a little white lie though. So is this maybe just one of those white lies? So why would he tell a white lie? Why would he over-exaggerate the threat of COVID in kids? Well, because the FDA the other day came out and said that kids from the ages of 9 to 11 can take the vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine, which means it's going to be mandated. And they're getting ready to do this for 6-month-olds as well. They're going to mandate it on 6-month-olds. Now the question is, well, who would do this? Who would vaccinate a 5-year-old? Or who would vaccinate a 6-month-old? That's crazy. So how does he get people to do it? Well, he scares them. He scares you. How can you do that? Well, you just inflate the threat of COVID on kids. There's no threat to kids about COVID. But Fauci is a fearmonger. A fearmonger is someone who deliberately spreads fear among people. He said something that's just not true. Will he come back and admit it? I got to run here, but we have another study I want to share, but let me just give you the very short of it. So the other point is that people say, oh, we need to vaccinate kids, we need to mask kids because if COVID spreads in school, then the policy says that all close contacts need to leave school as well. And like let's say your kid's on the volleyball team and some kid on the volleyball team gets COVID, now the whole volleyball team has to stop playing. So to prevent that from happening, we need to mask kids and vaccinate kids. I've had a ton of people call into my show and tell me that. My first response is, well, that's just get rid of this stupid policy. Right? If the policy says that all close contacts have to quarantine for 10 days, that's a dumb policy. Just get rid of the policy, problem solved. But all right, let's get to the point though. Do kids even spread COVID? So they did a study. Oxford University did a study. They took, it was like 80 control group and then 80 intervention groups. And the very short of it is, in 80 of the schools, if someone got sick, they sent them all home for 10 days. Any close contact, they sent them home for 10 days. In the other group of 80 schools, if anyone got sick, they just tested the close contacts and then kept them in school. And if anyone had COVID, then of course they went home. But anyone who didn't have COVID, they stayed in school. And after 6 months or whatever it was, no difference. No difference. There's no need to send kids home if they have a close contact who has COVID. Here's the line from the study. COVID-19 rates in school-based contacts in both intervention and the control groups were less than 2%. So that means only less than 2% of the kids who were close contacts ended up getting COVID. Less than 2%. Daily contact testing is a safe alternative to home isolation following school-based exposures. So we don't need to be even doing this ridiculous thing of quarantining everyone who's a close contact, because kids don't really spread it, and kids certainly aren't getting sick, and they're not dying any more than the flu. What was the fact the other day? More kids have died in, was it Chicago or Baltimore or DC? Probably all of them. More kids have died from being murdered, like errant gunfire, than have died from COVID. All right, we got to run. Let's play these quick comedy groups. This guy's name's Tyler Fisher, and I've just been perusing a bunch of his stuff, and it's pretty good. First, here's a message to the unvaxxed.
Hi, this is a little message to the unvaccinated. Ugh. You are killing everyone. It's your fault. You're being selfish, so get the vaccine because I'm vaccinated. I am vaccinated, okay? And so I'm protected because the vaccine is safe and effective. So if you're around me and you're unvaccinated, then you're putting me at well, you're not. No, okay. So you're selfish because if I'm protected and you're around me, then I'm fine. But you're me. Sorry. If you're not vaccinated, then you're not. You're racist, is what I'm saying.
Tyler Fish, let's do one more. This is his Fauci impersonation relevant to the whole kid conversation.
Look, I rarely admit I'm wrong, but I was wrong about children needing masks outside. They do not need a mask outside. If they have a plastic bag over the head, toss a clear bag over your kid's dome piece. Duct tape around the neck so no droplets can come in or out. Poke a couple holes so they can breathe. And heck, if they get hungry, you can even throw a couple graham crackers in there. Now, it's not going to offer the perfect protection, so I'd even go ahead and dip your kids in a vat of boiling hot wax. It'll dry and sort of make a protective COVID shell. 2 straws in the nose so they could breathe. Toss them in a crawl space of the attic, and then in 3 to 9 to 25 years, you can pull them out, crack the shell, and they can get back to a normal life, playing and going to school. It just makes common sense.
Throw your kids in the attic. Maybe one day it'll be safe enough to go outside. True story. Mike Slater. Spread the word. Slater Crusaders, we are lied to all the time. Our perceptions are manipulated intentionally. I just got 2 quick examples here before we get to our main topic. Today, it's confirmed beyond all confirmation necessary that Hunter Biden laptop was real. But remember when it first came out during the campaign, it was Russian disinformation. You remember all of how hard it was hit against this. Social media accounts were locked out. New York Post couldn't even go onto their Twitter account. It was right, the whole thing. Check this out. If you Google right now, and I did this, if you Google HHS whistleblower Project Veritas or anything similar to that, this is what comes up on Google. I've never seen this before. It looks like these results are quickly changing. And then it doesn't give the website to Project Veritas. That's unbelievable. Just one of countless examples of how the media can manipulate your perception. And one of the big ones that's been going on for a long time is guns, right? We're told that guns cause murder, and we never hear about the self-defense. I want to go to John Lott Jr. wrote a wonderful article, Real Clear Investigations. There are far more defensive gun uses than murders in America, and here's why you rarely hear them. He's from the Crime Prevention Research Center. Mr. Lott, how are you, sir?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Good to talk to you. Let's start off with some numbers, then we'll get to the why. What are some numbers we need to know?
Well, so far this year, there have been something about 1,000 news media reports on defensive gun uses. Virtually all of those are in local newspapers around the country. But even those cases really give a very selective view on how defensive gun uses occur. What murders are considered more newsworthy than woundings, and woundings are understandably considered a lot more newsworthy than, let's say, a woman brandishing a gun and the criminal running away. If you look at the news stories they're covered, 43% of them involve the attacker being killed. 42% of them involve the attacker being wounded. And only 4% of those involve brandishings of guns. And yet, when we look at the data from researchers, the ratios are the opposite. About 95% of the time that people use guns defensively, it merely involves brandishing. But, if you're an editor of a news bureau and you have 2 stories, in one case there's a dead body on the ground, in another case a woman brandishes a gun and the criminal runs away, no shots fired, no crime actually committed, I think we all would probably make the same decisions on what's newsworthy, but it has a real impact on people's perceptions.
Yeah, that's such a good point. So how does one calculate any of this stuff? And this is hard. I mean, it's hard for COVID to calculate things accurately, and it's hard for stuff like this. I remember reading a lot about like mass shootings. Well, what's a mass shooting, right? How do you even calculate that? Is it 4 people dead, 5 people dead, 3? Like, how do you calculate this type of stuff?
Okay, well, you bring up a lot of different points there. The way researchers and the government goes and tries to figure out, let's say, the number of crimes that occur, there are 2 ways they do it. They look at reported crimes to police, but we know a lot of crimes aren't reported. In fact, on average, less than half of violent crimes are reported to police. And the way they know that is to go and do these massive surveys that are out there. And when you look at surveys, you're going to find, in the vast majority of them, about 700,000 to 3.5 million defensive gun users. Most of them are around 2 million times a year that people use guns defensively in order to try to stop crime. But, the vast majority of those, as I said, aren't going to be considered newsworthy type cases. With regard to mass public shootings, there are a lot of different definitions out there, as you say. The FBI's traditional definition has been 4 or more people killed in a public place, not involving some other type of crime. What they're trying to get at there are the types of cases that get news coverage, where you have an attack at a school or a mall, where the point of the attack is to go and just to kill or harm as many people as possible. There are other numbers that are out there, something from the gun violence archive that is constantly used by the media, involves 3 or more people shot. They could be wounded. And it involves overwhelmingly other crimes, particularly fights among gang members, over drug turf. Those are important types of cases. But to lump together, I think, cases where that are newsworthy, they're newsworthy for a reason, where somebody goes in and just trying to kill innocent victims versus gangs fighting against each other over drug turf. It really gives people a misimpression. So when you hear these claims about one mass, shooting a day that's occurring, those, you're talking about like 85% of those are really just gang fights over drug turf.
Yeah. And then also a lot of times they lump in suicides in there as well, which is obviously a different thing. Super interesting. I got so many questions here, but I want everyone to just read the book and check out your group to learn more. Let me just end with this. How do we get the truth out there? How do you get people to see the unseen, right?
No, it's understandable why the media covers a lot of the stuff that it does. But, when the media goes and has an airline crash, I think nowadays, anyway, they go and mention in the news story how rare it is. You look at things like the coverage of mass public shootings that you were mentioning before. I wish once in a while the media would mention things like it occurred in a place where guns are banned, because about 95% of mass public shootings occur in places where guns are banned. These killers may be crazy in some sense, but they're not stupid. Their goal is to try to go and kill as many people as possible. And if they go to a place where victims aren't able to go and defend themselves, the successful attacks are going to be more successful. My guess is that the entire debate that we have right now would be very different if the media would once in a while, because they mention things like how the person got the gun or what type of gun was used. Often those facts are wrong in the initial news stories. The simplest thing for the media to go and check is whether or not a gun was allowed in the particular place where the attack occurred or not. The other thing with regard to mass public shootings is people have this perception that the United States is unique in terms of the rate that these attacks occur. In fact, if you look worldwide, the United States makes up a little bit less than 1% of the mass public shooters, even though we make up almost 5% of the world population. We're way below the world average. It's just, attacks, even in Europe or other places that occur, just don't get news coverage. I mean, you may have missed just a couple of days ago, there was a big attack at a university in Russia. It got briefly one little news story and then was gone from the news.
Yep. I didn't hear
Most people. Sorry.
I hate I gotta cut you off, Mr. Lott. I apologize, we gotta run, but that's so fascinating. Just blows my mind people's perspective and how perspectives are formed and how important it is for all of us to get the truth out there. I'm grateful for you. Go get the book, everyone. Gun Control Myths. The Crime Prevention Research Center, Gun Control Myths, and there's latest articles on Real Clear Investigations. Mr. Lott, thanks for your time and your work, sir.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so many people are just misinformed. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, I live in California, and we just had our recall election and failed miserably. So I'm convinced that California will never be red again. So it is all the more important that the red states we currently have remain red. Ash Wright is a Republican strategist out of Texas. Ash, how are you, brother?
I'm great, man. How are you?
Good. We got a ton to talk about. Let's start with the border. Del Rio, obviously, right now. Texas is a big, big state. California is a big state. We have a border. Most of the state doesn't care about it. I'm in San Diego. We're pretty close to it, so we talk about it more.
Sure.
Do the people of Texas care about what's happening in Del Rio?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, especially in South Texas where it's actually affecting their communities. I mean, we're finding that if you look at polling data, that immigration and illegal aliens affecting communities have gone from roughly the third or fourth consistently polling issue to significantly the top. So a study I saw by a group called Majority Strategies that does a lot of campaigns here in Texas produced a study that said of all voters in the state of Texas, immigration was more than double any other issue important to them.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's so interesting. Not in California. One of the postmortems of the recall here in California was that Republicans lost the state in 1994 with Prop 187, which basically outlawed illegal immigration in California. 58% of the people voted for it, and then it got outlawed in the courts. But they said that was the end of the Republican Party in California.
Sure.
Do you see anything like that happening in Texas, where there's enough pushback against illegal immigrants, but then that ends the Republican Party, and there's now a big groundswell of Democrats because you Republicans are so mean?
I mean, I think that in theory that could be, that could be possible. I think the difference is at the same time that Texas Republicans are trying to secure our border, and we do have a mass influx of as illegal immigrants get into the state of Texas, and they, in some areas, are able to vote. But if you'll recall, several months ago, we put in new voting regulations around it. So now you have to have a voter ID, things like that. So it makes it a lot more difficult for illegal immigrants who cross the border and come into Texas to actually vote and to sway and change elections. It's not as easy as it is, say, in California or New York or Illinois, et cetera. And the other thing, too, is that what I would say more likely to turn Texas blue, and it won't happen this cycle, but is actually the migration from your state to our state. I think that's actually pulling more towards Texas going blue than actually legal immigration.
That's a huge problem, and I apologize. Let's talk about everyone's favorite Irish politician, Robert O'Rourke, and his fantastic rebranding of his life still again as some Hispanic guy. Is he going to be the guy? He's running for governor now, right? Is that what he announced? Is he going to be the guy that's ever going to win? Because it was pretty close last go around.
Right. So it was pretty close. Look, he's not the guy. He's not going to be what turns Texas blue. But I mean, look, it was close in a sense. If you look at Beto O'Rourke versus Ted Cruz, so Ted Cruz beat Beto by roughly 215,000 votes. But if you take that same election, so the 2018 general election, so we're going back 4 years of non-presidential. But if you look at Greg Abbott's numbers versus Beto's numbers, Greg Abbott outperformed him by almost 500,000 votes. And so it's not this Ted Cruz versus Beto race anymore. Abbott is the most popular politician in the state of Texas. The federal government, Joe Biden being in office, has given Abbott a lot of ammunition. And part of what Beto's problem is that he's more into being a celebrity than he is to actually being a politician. And so he'll love the celebrity. He'll let D.C. drive his message. And the D.C. liberal Democrat isn't the same liberal Democrat that's here in Texas. And so he, when he was campaigning against Ted Cruz, I thought one of the biggest mistakes that he made was he started talking about taking guns away and confiscating guns. And even if you're a Texas Democrat, they still want their guns. Beto just doesn't realize that the Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders Democrat that's in Washington, D.C. leading their party is not the Democrat that's showing up to vote at the Texas polls.
Ash, I hate we got to run. I'm putting the future of Texas politics on you. Keep it red. We need you.
Okay. Will do.
Thanks, Ash. Appreciate you, man. True story. Mike Slater will do it again tomorrow. Spread the word.